Hey Keith, this is Chris. This is one of those things that's going to be easier to share through video rather than an email. So, um, this is to do with the scaling of objects, UI objects on the screen. Um, Now, I'm starting to use TextMesh Pro for a variety of these things. That gives us kerning and all that sort of stuff that we need, which is great. Um, When it comes to simply just drawing some text on the screen, this is some text. We've basically got three ways of scaling this, and we've been using two of them, which is what has led to some of the problems that we've had, and it leads to some recursion issues with having to check the font size and resize it manually and stuff. So um, here's what we're going to need to do. Basically, when I look at this in the inspector, if I click on it, then you can see it here. I actually sized that down. It should be bigger originally, I think. Um, yeah. The You've got the actual font size, and you know we should be able to set that basically via XML. Um, when somebody is setting, when somebody like Blue or you or me or a player who's modding or whatever want to say, this is how big I want the text to be in this particular button or this particular text box or whatever, then that's how they would say what they want. Then we've got the actual width and height of the um, actual rect transform as well, which if we've got our wrapping and overflow, I turned that off, whoops. If we've got that, go ahead and change that to ellipses, but if we've got it so there's just so much text in here that it can't fit, then it'll go to ellipses, or else it'll just overflow. We get to choose that sort of thing now, which is nice. And the width of that determines how it will behave. Now, these two things have a relationship based on their definition size in the XML, which is really nice. So somebody defines font size of 11.8, and they define a width of 273.2, then this is what the text will look like if this is the text. And that's great. That's something that we want to see continue to be the case, regardless of screen resolution and aspect ratio. Now, there may be some cases where we say, okay, they're using an ultra wide screen, so let's actually make the width, 481 or something. If you wanted to do that, then you take the rect transform and just make that wider. Now, all of this stuff is presupposing that we're not changing the screen resolution. There's then this automated process that has nothing to do with the player, with what the player is defining, which is, okay, we've got this stuff defined. We're basically to this point with a particular element. And there is some particular aspect ratio slash screen resolution in general that has been defined based on the actual runtime of a given end user's computer. So at that point, um, it has to be um, equal, but you can set and should set the scale uh, here of the rect transform. And this is, if you go to self-t.local scale, it's the X and Y components. And so you can play with this in the editor by hitting R and then dragging the middle of this. You can see how this comes in and out evenly. And so if you were to scale it unevenly, you get weird things. Um, but one of the nice things about TextMesh Pro is we can size up and down pretty much infinitely, and it is using vector-based points to draw stuff. So it has fairly unlimited clarity, unlike this older stuff here, which is using the Unity stuff. You can see it gets all blurry, which is terrible. I mean, you see the difference there. Not to mention, which we didn't have, kerning control and all that sort of stuff with the Unity things. So, generally speaking, therefore, the rule of thumb is that we're going to want to do any sort of screen resolution scaling based on the X and the Y component here. You don't have to worry about the Z. You don't have to scale that universally. It literally does nothing on the UI. But if you want it half size, and the X and the Y need to be set to that. And, full size, you're back. So XML would be setting the width, the height, the position, and setting the font size. And we can, in the prefabs, which get called by the XML, we can set things like wrapping and overflow, or if you, in alignment and all that jazz, or if you would like to build that into the XML, then please feel free. If we want to have it so they can choose a font, actually, don't even try to build that into the XML. That's not going to work out well. So we're going to want a different prefab per thing that uses a specific font. So if it's a basic text, then we'd also have basic text font number 2, and rather than trying to let people select fonts, because that with TextMesh Pro can get a little weird. Anyway, so that means that the logic for how exactly the text inside buttons and so forth gets sized is going to need to be completely redone. But that gives us an extra benefit in that when we've got a row of buttons, we don't want varying sizes of the text in there. That doesn't look right, obviously. And so if we've got a row of buttons along the bottom of the screen, then they should all be whatever point size is defined. And then based on the size of the button, that's determining the rect width. And that's really more of an aspect ratio thing, I guess. And then when it comes time to actually size the button, see, that's where it gets tricky. I'm not sure. We'll have to mess with that some. But you see the principle involved. There's going to be some fiddling to make sure that we get that right, because we're kind of skirting around Unity's normal scaling logic. But this is the way that we're going to be able to get consistently sized buttons without having things in terms of the text that's within them, without having them scale all over the place in nutty ways. One way to get around that buttons issue, if it really is that much of an issue, is that we could just say you don't get to set the aspect ratio of buttons. There's not really a reason to. We can just say, we've got button blue, as we're calling it. We can just make a copy of that and set the width to be, something larger. And then the text on the inside, we set that to have the rect width, which matches that. And then when we do the scaling on this thing, then we're doing the transform scaling, which makes it bigger or smaller like that. But the aspect ratio of that button um, stays the same relative to itself. So I can't imagine that there's that many aspect ratios of buttons that we're going to have. So that may be one simple way to pre-bake kind of the aspect ratios of the buttons into our um, prefabs. And on the one hand, that sounds like a pain from a workflow standpoint, I imagine. Um, but it serves a couple of purposes. One, it simplifies the math quite a bit, which is great for runtime, obviously. And two, it lets us get kind of that WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. Blue or whoever, Mod or whatever, can set up exactly what they're expecting to see, and they can see, okay, if it's, you know, a text box that is this wide, then I can expect that X amount of text is going to fit in here at the font size that I've defined, which is relative to the font um, to the button size, and so they can see, okay, this is what I expect. And this is literally then what they see on the screen. However, based on the screen resolution, it's doing this. And as far as they're concerned, it's still they're seeing it's still WYSIWYG. It's what they were expecting, and now it is what they're seeing. So um, just having more prefabs may be one answer to that. The more that we can bake in prefabs versus trying to calculate at runtime, the better for performance sake. Certainly when it comes to like recursive font size setting and crazy stuff like that. Um, but we should be able to keep the um, GUI um, calculation costs to practically nothing, and we shouldn't have to be calling any sort of special um, sub methods on that. But it's going to take some rework of what we have with our existing buttons to, bake that stuff in. But then it should pave the way towards much easier setup of something new as we go forward, as well as you know paring the code down as much as possible so that it's has no loops in the text setting thing, font size, none of that stuff, and um, that should pretty much handle it. I think that'll be good. I'm gonna lob this over the fence in your direction, but anyway, yeah. Thanks for watching.